Hey everyone, welcome to Expert Media Show. This is your host and teacher, Tony Laddig, and welcome to session 5. Today we're going to talk about public domain magazine images and how they pretty much suck and how you can fix that. Of course, I'm getting ready to teach a new course this week called Public Domain Magazine Hacks, and that is our sponsor for today, Public Domain Magazine Hacks. And I'm really excited about this one because I'm going to be sharing some new things in it that I haven't talked about before, because I'm not really one to teach the same thing over and over and over again. But this one is going to be a lot of fun. Of course, public domain magazines are one of the most underutilized pieces of content that there is, in my opinion, if you're talking about public domain stuff. And the primary reason why has been because they're not readily accessible. Normally you have to go to eBay and find them and scan them yourself and all of that. And most people honestly just don't want that trouble. Fortunately, a lot of them are starting to be scanned now and posted online using Google Books and different places like that. So we're going to get into all of that fun and frivolity starting this Thursday. It's going to be 3 sessions. But I figured that today it would be kind of cool to talk a little bit about one piece of the equation. And I'm going to mention it some in the course in more detail, of course, but that is printed images. And there's tons of photographs and illustrations in public domain magazines, periodicals, newspapers, comics, all of that kind of stuff, where the copyrights have expired, but because of how they're produced, courtesy of printing, they're just really hard to use or reproduce because of those pesky little dots. And for those of you who aren't really aware, public domain essentially means copyright expired. And the reason why that's kind of a big deal is that images, which is what we're talking about today, can be used however we choose without legal issues and all of that. And so we don't have to worry about being sued or anything like that. If the copyright has expired, it's fair game. It's in the public domain, and we can use those images however we see fit, whether they're photographs or illustrations, graphics, whatever the case is, we can use them. However, printed images have halftone dots in most cases. Some of the photogravure stuff from way back when ago aren't affected by that image, but of course with the advent of printing presses and all of that, the best way to reproduce images was to break those images up into little tiny dots, and that practice is still used today. It's much higher tech, but if you put a loop on pretty much any image, black and white or color, in a book, magazine, or whatever, you're going to see those annoying little halftone dots. And the problem is that whenever you try to scan those, you get a crazy little pattern called a moire pattern. And that pattern makes most printed images from public domain periodicals virtually unusable as is. And working as a career designer since the early 90s and being a photographer and all of that kind of stuff, trust me when I tell you that I have tried all kinds of experiments and different kinds of strategies just to get rid of those dots. And in some cases, it's easier said than done. Now, if you're scanning yourself, some scanners have, in their scanning software, have built into them the ability to remove that dot. Basically, it puts it out of focus and then applies a sharpen filter. That's really how it works. But you're not ending up with a sharpened result. If you try to scan an image off of a newspaper or a magazine and make it larger than what it currently is, it just gets worse. It doesn't get better at all, which definitely doesn't help us. And of course, if you're talking about newspapers, which are periodical is nothing more than something that's printed periodically, like every week or every month or every day in the case of some newspapers. So that's all that periodicals mean, and it includes magazines, newspapers, comic books, journals, those kinds of things. Now, the trick is to restore the images to a form that is usable for whatever we need images for. And to me, it's kind of like putting a kid in a candy store and telling them that they can't have candy. I don't know if you've spent any time at all looking through copyright expired magazines. I have a lot over the years. I've bought a lot over the years, especially on topics that I like photography is a really good example. And it's kind of like saying, here's all this beautiful photography, and chances are likely that we would never have access to the source images, the original photos or graphics that were used to create those halftones. So we're kind of stuck with or limited to the scanned images that we see in those old magazines. There's something that I've been experimenting with for a couple years now. I've tried a lot that didn't work. And there's really no need for me to focus on what doesn't work because it doesn't work. Okay. But there are some experiments that I've done, and they kind of evolved out of different experiments, different focuses that I've had. Some of the software we'll talk about today is going to sound incredibly familiar because I use it for a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. But it works. And I found that the best results come from transforming halftone images into art using photo to art software. Some works better than others. And I found that somehow in the amazing algorithms that these companies develop, some of the software has this uncanny ability to get rid of those dots. It's almost like magic, honestly. The first time I tried it, I'm like, oh, I wonder what would happen if I do this. And the first time I tried it was actually with comics. In some cases, it works better than others. It's not the perfect solution. You do lose detail to a certain extent and all of that. But if you're after using the art of the images rather than high resolution photographs, then we're good to go. If you're trying to figure out how you can take a halftone printed photograph that's in an old magazine from the 20s or 30s or whatever, and turn it into a high resolution photograph, well, we're not there yet. Okay, the technology is getting there though, but it's not quite there yet. Some of the new AI-driven image processing software is starting to fill in those blanks. I don't know how it does it. There's a few of my favorites that we're going to look at today. JixiePix products, of course, I'm a huge fan of. I own all of their products, and for good reason. They are amazing and very low cost. And then the Topaz Labs products, I own pretty much all of those as well for the same reasons. These two companies, I should probably be a spokesperson for them. I'm not getting paid by them to talk about these. I just love the software. It works extremely well. So let me give you an example of a couple of the images that I found. So these are 3 images. They're photographs that I found in a couple different magazines. The halftone images, you can see the patterns here. You can't really see the dots themselves from the halftone image, but you can see the result of the halftone images. And that's these little patterns called moire patterns, or however you want to say it. Our goal for today in today's training is to figure out the best way to get rid of those so that we can actually use these images. Now, I'm not really going to get into colorizing the images today. These are black and white because they came from a magazine that was published in 1912. So they've been around for a little while, over 100 years. So let's get to it. And we have our first image. Now, a couple things just before we get started. You can see here that because this is a screenshot, the image size isn't super huge, 2200 pixels by 1500 pixels. So if we divide that by 300, we're at about 5 by 7 if we wanted to use this for print. Let's say that we wanted it to be a little bit bigger and change the resolution to 300, and let's see, 8 by 10, 10 times 300 is 3000. So if we do 3000, that'll give us basically 7 by 10, give or take. So I'm going to hit OK, and it blows it up just a little, makes it a little more fuzzier. So you can see at 200%, you can see it's definitely blurry. And the dots are present, but in this particular image, they're lessened compared to what we see here in some of these other examples. So here's what I do. Usually, as I mentioned, there's a couple different programs that I like to use. The first one that is probably my initial go-to where I start is JixiePix Pastello Pro. And so if we come up here and hit Filter and then JixiePix and then Pastello, it launches the software and it applies the default filter, whatever that is. And you can see here that we have like, let me change my brush there. It has a texture applied to it and all of that, which I'll show you here in a little bit how to get rid of it. But normally I will default to one of the pastel settings. You can see here it has chalk, charcoal, color pencil, Conte, crayon, DaVinci, pastel pencil, and then user presets, which are ones that you create yourself. So I usually play around with some of the pastel settings just to see how it looks, which that isn't really what I'm interested in there. So I like to start with the presets, but I usually don't end there. I'll usually tweak them a little bit unless I see something that I really like. So like this one here kind of looks cool except for the rough edges. I mean, it's very artsy looking, which is great, but I don't like how the edges look and I don't like the texture of the paper. So we can actually get rid of that just by clicking on paper and then here where it says edge blend, click on that and choose number 1. That gets rid of that edge. Texture strength, we can turn down to 0 and that gets rid of that. Paper color, you can see how it's tinting the image. We can change that to white if we want, which didn't really affect things much. Here you can see an artistic finish is being applied, which is what's adding the color to it. We can turn that to 0 and that'll get rid of that. And then you can see how, first of all, the pattern is gone. But we've also lost a lot of detail as well. So one of the things that I like to do is turn the stroke size down to the smallest that it can be. Usually turn the stroke variation down completely. Color enhance, we don't need to do that at all. And stroke volume is one of those things that you can experiment with. Sometimes turning it down the whole way isn't the best answer. Going up the whole way is. And so now you can see here, just with the change that we made, we're losing some detail, but those dots are gone. We still have the overarching details and all of that, which is great. Now, if we wanted to add in some of those details, one of the things that's cool that we can do with this software is add additional layers. Okay, so like we can click on the little plus sign here and we have choices from all the different types of options that are included in this particular program. Pastel, chalk, charcoal, Conte, color pencil, and so on. So what I want to experiment with here a little bit is pencil, just to see if it adds in additional detail. So one thing I want is a small stroke size. I want detail. I want conform strokes. I found normally turning them up as high as it'll go gives you more accurate results. Stroke variation, we're going for as accurate as we can. Outline size, probably smaller. Pencil style, we can choose accurate or rough, just to kind of show you the difference. Because of the detail that I have, it doesn't make that much of a difference. We're black and white, so we don't need color enhancement at all. We don't need background fill at all. It does impact the image a little bit. Pressure is essentially like if you're working with a pencil, normally how hard you're pushing on the pencil. So if we turn it down really low versus really high, you can see that the detail, like in the slats and everything, is more pronounced with the stronger pressure. The other thing that we can do is control our layer opacity, which essentially determines how much of this particular effect is being applied here. So if we turn down, say, to 60, it's not quite as pronounced. You can really see it over in here versus 100%. See how like the cross hatching here is more pronounced. If I choose the original, you can see how all the dots are gone. We are getting some of the detail. Now we can't reclaim all of the detail, but I think you'll agree that overall, this isn't bad. It kind of looks good. It's very charcoal painterly kind of thing. But if we're talking about creating art and wanting to actually be able to use some of the images that we find, this is kind of one of the trade-offs, okay, is to get rid of some of that detail. And this program does so in a pretty cool way. So then we can click apply to photo and it'll render it and apply it to the photo. Now, one thing that I didn't do that I would really recommend doing is work from a copy rather than the original.